Now, the formal mandate on Elon Musk's Doge initiative officially reached its end on July 4th. And new reporting reveals the Trump administration is increasingly rehiring federal workers after its sweeping cuts created staffing shortages across government agencies. Officials say the focus has shifted from reducing the size of government to reshaping the federal workforce, with agencies, including the IRS and HHS, now seeking thousands of new employees. Now, Doge claims it saved $215 billion amid its cuts, but that figure has been widely disputed. And now some administration officials are acknowledging some of the workforce cuts may have gone too far. Surprise, surprise. Joining us now, the author of that report, Notice reporter Eric Katz. Eric, I think it's fascinating, A, that the Doge period is ending, but B, what do they even have to show for it as these agencies are now hiring back in pretty staggering numbers, in some cases larger than the cuts that were made last year?
Yeah, so at HHS, for example, Secretary Kennedy has said that he's going to hire 12,000 compared to the 10,000 that they cut. But some of these agencies are still reeling from these cutbacks, and they're kind of hiring back a fraction of what they lost. It's interesting because some of these agencies have admitted, like, we've cut too close to the bone, and there's core functions that we can't carry out anymore, and therefore we need to hire back. And in other cases, they're trying to bring out new people that they say are necessary to do new things, but they just cut staff that were doing very similar functions.
Yeah, I mean, you talked to a worker in the piece that you write who got laid off, checked a box basically, and said, yeah, I'd like to be considered for future employment opportunities. And then ultimately was like, no, it just like it hits too close to home to see them basically rehiring me for the same thing that they effectively fired me for a year ago.
Yeah, my colleague Natalie Nahles and I spoke to this person. She was at the National Endowment of the Humanities. She was named Employee of the Year for the agency in 2024, got laid off. They asked her to come back. And it's just, it's fascinating that these agencies are looking to bring back the exact talent that they lost. And there's sort of an admission there that some of these people were doing things that we actually that they were administration priorities, and now we can't do them anymore.
I think the thing with Doge at the outset was, and I heard this from voters leading up to 2024 and the election, was, okay, it feels like there's government bloat, and maybe it's a good thing that we start looking at how the government is spending its money and resources. And then you watched the ways that Doge, under Elon Musk's guidance, came in, just started slashing stuff to the point where in real time we were hearing like, oh, we might have laid off people who have key functions around the nuclear capabilities of this country. We've got to bring those people back, right? Now, with the benefit of time and the fact that this program is ending, what do they have to show for it?
Well, it's interesting. And to your point, we talked to the head of the Office of Personnel Management that kind of sets HR policy, personnel policy around government. And he said that the Doge approach, they basically cut with a chainsaw instead of a scalpel, and they lost some people that they actually wanted. I think in the end, some of these agencies and functions are very much permanently affected. The U.S. Agency for National Development, for example, that's gone. State Department has picked up a little bit of that, but mostly those functions just aren't happening anymore. And there's key functions throughout government where services are slower to be delivered or not happening. There's contract and grant funding that's not going out the door or has been severely delayed because there's not the personnel to sort of carry that out. But the Doge people involved themselves have talked about the fact that they had this goal of massively shrinking the federal deficit, and they weren't able to accomplish that.
And you and I were talking before we even came on that people associated with Doge who worked for the program have said basically, yeah, we cut things pretty haphazardly. And when we realized we were doing that, it didn't change our approach. And so I know there are questions you're going to keep asking about what it looks like for the Doge period to end and the government to rebuild or reform or reshape. And I'm interested in the answers to those questions. You did bring also some other new reporting. You've got a scoop out about a draft report inside the Treasury Department that warns of the risks posed by the artificial intelligence market, which is notable given the ways in which this administration, at least from a public-facing perspective, is quite pro-AI and these companies.
Yeah, it's an interesting report that we got a hold of. the administration has distanced itself from it, but these are career analysts within the Treasury Department who are sounding the alarm to some degree about the risks posed to, like you said, the markets and the impacts that that could have on the U.S. economy, because AI has become so intertwined and fundamental to so many different sectors within the economy, that if this bubble were to burst, and they say there are some signs of that similar to the dot-com from the early 2000s, that it would have send significant shockwaves throughout the economy. Like you said, this is not something that the administration is saying publicly. The top officials, Scott Bessent and other economic policy people, are saying, we just need to keep investing in AI, and it's sort of a key part of the economy. So it's really interesting that this report is within Treasury.
Within Treasury, draft at this point, but notable and instructive as to some of the guidance that might be being given behind the scenes, even as the public posture is, as you said, quite confident in AI and the companies who have stuck pretty closely to this White House. Reporter for Notice, Eric Katz, thank you for coming on with a lot of great reporting.
There have been some signs of late that President Trump's MAGA base might be fracturing. MS Now correspondent David Noriega talked recently with a group of former Trump supporters who are now separating from the president about what pushed them out of the MAGA movement.
When you were a part of the MAGA movement, how deep were you?
I was as deep as anyone could have been. I was an aspiring MAGA pundit. I had bylines in places like Fox and The Federalist. I spoke at Trump groups. I was a donor on the campaign. I was unapologetically a MAGA and Trump supporter.
Rich Logus is the founder and CEO of Leaving MAGA, a nonprofit for those disillusioned by the movement. The group, which Logus says is funded entirely by small donors, provides support groups, de-radicalization resources, and a platform for members to share their experiences. To get a better understanding of what makes people leave MAGA, we heard from an array of the group's members.
I grew up really poor, so a lot of my friends' parents would be responsible for helping me get to prom or making sure I had, new shoes for school, and they were all MAGA. And it was very much this constant conversation of, if you want to have nice things, be a Republican.
I really wanted acceptance with my father, and my father was very much into Fox News, so that was something that we would connect on.
I became heavily indoctrinated into trad wife culture. We were all absolutely fine with household voting. And that
Right, so just to clarify, for people who don't know, household voting means the woman does not vote.
So the SAVE Act, in essence, is to take that right away from women.
In 2015 and 16, I felt that the two parties were the same. And even though Trump ran as a Republican, I was very enticed by his outsider status.
When you heard Trump claim that the election had been stolen, were any of you like, yeah, they stole this election, Trump won?
Yeah.
Yeah?
I did believe that the election was stolen. I believe that the riots were actually, those were patriots. Until I actually switched off Fox News and started getting my news from other places, my information, that's when it finally hit.
Diversifying their news turned out to be a common factor in leaving MAGA.
I met my now husband in 2021, and they made me watch a documentary on January 6th, and I didn't even know what happened on January 6th prior to the PBS documentary. And I looked at him and I said, Scott, did that really happen? And he was like, where have you been?
It's not easy to believe something firmly and then come to the conclusion that you've been wrong for many years. Was that hard for you?
Yes, yeah. That was something that I just couldn't square because I couldn't be wrong because I consider myself intelligent.
I had believed that when Trump ran that he would be somebody who would be different as an outsider. I think that he was correct in pointing out a lot of the flaws of our political system. It just turned out, unfortunately, that he didn't try to solve those or remedy those ills, that he exacerbated them.
Hearing you guys talk about MAGA and about supporting Trump, it sounds like you're talking often about like a cult that's damaging,
yes.
Right?
Yeah.
But he's the president of the United States, and it's not a cult. It's like the dominant political ideology of the United States in this moment.
And what MAGA does provide is a place where people feel seen and heard and validated. We used to say, we're not in the cult, the outside world is the cult, and we're not the crazies, the outside world are the crazies.
The group says that leaving MAGA often means losing relationships with loved ones, but it also teaches them to approach those loved ones with empathy.
When I left MAGA, like I said, I kicked the door open and jumped through. I had a heart full of hate, so I would just go on the offensive and attack anybody and everybody that still supported it. And I've learned over time that that's not going to change anybody. In fact, it's going to push people over. So I've learned to be that empathy, that voice of concern, that caring voice. You can do this. I did it.
MS Now correspondent David Noriega with that report, and at least a fascinating one. President Trump has undeniably broken a lot of signature campaign promises about trying to, manage the economy to no foreign wars, and that's just the start of a lengthy list as to why so many of his supporters are finally abandoning him.
I would say, though, I would hesitate to call this a widespread trend at all, because you look at the polling and his hardcore MAGA base is overall not leaving him. But this is an interesting sliver and subset of showing just the earthquakes that have happened. Really, I attribute it primarily to the war in Iran and that big promise that was broken that has led through a global economic ripple effect of chaos.
And the Epstein files, too. And you're right. Most of his base still staying with him. But if he's losing some of his base, that shows that so much of those independents, those swing voters, they've definitely left. And that's why Republicans are so nervous about this November.
A deeply disturbing new report published in the last hour about Graham Plattner is shaking up the crucial U.S. Senate race in Maine. Politico has new bombshell reporting from a woman who dated Graham Plattner, who says Plattner forced her to have sex with him nearly 5 years ago, despite her repeated objections. From that reporting, the woman, a 41-year-old Maine resident named Jenny Rasico, detailed the alleged incident to Politico in 3 interviews over the course of the past 2 weeks. Politico also spoke with a man Rasico dated and confided in the years after the alleged incident, and reviewed documents, including emails between her and her therapist and messages between Rasico and an acquaintance whom she warned against getting involved with Plattner years before he ran for office. Rasico said she had an on and off again relationship with Plattner, who is now the Democratic Senate nominee in Maine, for more than 2 years before he entered her rural Maine home uninvited one night in late 2021, deeply intoxicated, and he forced himself on her while she repeatedly told him to stop. She said she cut off contact with him after telling him the encounter was not consensual. I remember him grabbing my pelvis and being really forceful of me, she said. I remember the specific moment where I thought to myself, like, this is no longer my choice. Plattner has denied the allegations, telling Politico, quote, these allegations are troubling, serious, and false. Any accusation of non-consensual behavior is categorically untrue. Graham Plattner released a video just moments ago in which he says he's taking time to reflect on a path forward. Take a listen.
I wanted to directly address the troubling, serious, and false allegations against me. Any accusation of non-consensual behavior is categorically false. Over the last 10 months, I have been deeply humbled by the faith Mainers have put in me. You have welcomed me into your homes, into your places of work, into your restaurants, into your houses of worship. You have shown that a different kind of politics, one that puts the interests of people over corporations, is not just possible, but is inevitable. This movement we have built, the largest volunteer base in the history of Maine politics, the hundreds of thousands of grassroots donors, and the supporters across the ideological spectrum, we were united in a love of Maine, a belief that our politics must change, and a focus on defeating Susan Collins. So, regardless of the inaccuracy of the reporting, but mindful of the political reality it will inflict, we are taking the time to reflect on the best path forward for the state that I love, the people that I love, the movement I belong to, and the goal of defeating Susan Collins. Those were the goals when we launched this campaign, and they remain my goals today. On June 9th, 154,058 Mainers, the most in primary history, voted to reject a broken politics beholden to Washington and the donor class. They voted for hope, for change, to take back our economy, to take back our power, and to take back our Senate seat. Throughout it all, you never turned your back on me, and I will not turn my back on you now. Every one of you deserves to see that vision come to fruition and see Susan Collins defeated, and we will use every tool at our disposal to do so. As Maine goes, so goes the nation. As always, thank you.
I want to bring into this conversation MS Now congressional reporter Michael Schnell and host of the Fast Politics podcast, contributing writer for the New York Times, Molly Jong-Fast. Also with us, my friend and colleague, MS Now anchor and correspondent Ayman Mohyeldin. It is great to have all of you guys here with me. I want to start with you, Michael, to break down what we know at this point about this reporting. And I know that you're out to your sources on the Hill. Tell me what you expect to hear or what you might already be hearing from them as they process these allegations from Politico.
Yeah, serious allegations from Politico. The latest shoe to drop when we talk about the controversies that have been dogging Graham Plattner's candidacy and campaign. As you laid out, this is an allegation involving a woman who said that she met Graham Plattner back in 2019 when they met on a dating app. The alleged assault happened in 2021. Graham Plattner had said he wanted to come over and see her. They were in a consensual relationship at that point. She said she was not in the mood, but Graham Plattner then let himself into her home, walked up her stairs, found her laying on a couch. He then got on top of this woman, and she had said, please get off me. She didn't. She was not interested in engaging at that moment. She also says that he smelled of alcohol. She then removed herself from the room and went towards her bedroom with Graham Plattner following her. And then this woman tells Politico that he, at that point, forced her to have sex. Afterwards, he had fallen asleep, and in the next morning, he had left her home. Again, these allegations happening in 2019. We are still waiting for reaction from some of Graham Plattner's top supporters up on Capitol Hill, of which he has many. Graham Plattner, as you just played, denying these allegations, but notably saying that he's going to figure out how to move forward. The big date that we should all be paying attention to right now is July 13th. According to Maine law, candidates have until the second Monday in July, which is, again, a week from today, July 13th, where they can still remove themselves from the ballot when they can drop out. But the party can then nominate a replacement to be the standard bearer for that party. Notably, Janet Mills has still been on the ballot throughout this entire time. She got 20%, nearly 20% of the vote during that Democratic primary. Still a substantial amount of percent for somebody who wasn't even running but was still on the ballot. So certainly with Graham Plattner saying we're going to assess how to move forward, drawing a lot of eyeballs in terms of that July 13th date. But again, right now, no indication of how he plans to handle this. And we are still waiting to hear from some of his top supporters up on Capitol Hill.
Ayman, what did you make of that video from Graham Plattner? Because while he's denying these allegations, he's also, interestingly, at one point in the video, he starts to speak in past tense, as though he's about to or may potentially in the minutes, hours, days, suspend this campaign.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. And I think that Graham Plattner right now certainly has a credibility problem. And a lot of that has to do with what he says in previous statements when allegations come forward. He'll come forward and say, there's nothing else to come out, only for something else to come out. And that makes it harder and harder for his allies to politically defend him. And you're talking about the video that he just made. There's a few elements there that I thought were important. One, the part that he says, I'm going to reflect on the way forward, and to Michael's point about what that might mean politically for him. But towards the end of that statement, he also adds the part about how many voters voted for him the most in Maine's history, and the fact that he does not want to betray the people of Maine who voted for him. And he says they've stood by him, and he's not going to betray them. So again, it's a bit of an open-ended statement. What does that mean? Is he going to do potentially, in the eyes of many, the right thing of stepping aside and keeping the door open for somebody else? Does that mean he's going to stay in this race and fight these allegations? But to Michael's point, and to the point that Politico makes, these are different allegations, and for a few reasons. One, the way Politico described it, saying he has not previously been accused of sexual assault, I think is a different type of threshold in terms of allegations. Although he's been dogged by other allegations, of conduct and misconduct with women. The way it is characterized by Politico is that this is the first time he is being accused of sexual assault. But also the other important part in this is the receipts that this woman has.
Yeah.
The fact that she had told other people about an interaction with Graham Plattner that made her extremely uncomfortable and, according to Politico, crosses that threshold. That is something that I think we're seeing for the first time that gives so much more credibility to her story and to her allegations, even if Graham Plattner is denying them. If it's one thing that we have, talked about through the Me Too era is believe women, and certainly women who have told other people about their experiences, I think crosses a threshold that I think is going to put a lot of intense pressure on Graham Plattner's campaign, but also on his allies who have stood by him throughout previous allegations.
To that comment about the sort of post-Me Too era and the debate that sort of happened in the Democratic Party after this the series of allegations around Graham Plattner, part of, I think, what made it complicated for some Democrats to fully believe the woman who was at the center of the last round was that she was associated with right-wing politics. But this woman, I want to read part of what's out here. One of the reasons, she says to Politico, I didn't come forward sooner was the huge moral conflict that I had between supporting his politics. So she is saying, I actually agree with Graham Plattner, his positions, his politics. She's clearly more on the left, but not supporting him as a person. I just want the truth out there. I just want people to have a whole scope of who he is as a person. Molly, I want your take on what we're hearing in this new report from Politico, but also the fallout that you're expecting now as Democrats try to sort through what they need to do on behalf of the voters, the American people, because of this.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's one thing to have to have this first tranche. Remember, there was an earlier group of women, and now this is yet another tranche of allegations. And I think that, when you look at the polling on this, I just was looking at a poll that said 75% of people said that if there were more allegations, he should drop out. And I think this constant stream, and even you see the polling for him since the last batch of allegations, his numbers have gone down. I do think, look, I'm baffled that the vetting process for this candidate, number one. I mean, this is just, the fact that they're just constant, allegations, I think really is a sign that there just was not proper vetting here. And, you may, again, align with him politically, but the truth is, this is not a candidate who is ready for prime time on any stretch of the imagination. And Democrats have, there's a feeling in the party that candidates like this are not for the party. And, there has been a backlash to Me Too, but it has not been like this. The other thing I would say is that clearly this is a person who, at least from these allegations, that when drinking does not remember their behavior. That's what all these allegations say. So another reason why, I don't know how we got here, but this 17th, July 13th deadline seems to be key. And I think you see a person who is really coming forward when there's still time for him to drop out, which I think also shows that there's some feeling of this was just what she had to do. And the fact that there's so much on the women here when clearly this is, multiple women, multiple allegations is just very upsetting.
The backlash to the Trump profiteering, the billions coming in for Donald Trump. He makes more as president, where allegedly he's doing his work part-time making money. He makes more now than he did as a citizen or a businessman, as he likes to say. And that alone, before you go into any more detail, raises really troubling questions, like why someone who has a full-time government job, who says they're only doing occasional private business stuff as a side job, which no other president has tried to do, why they're making more now, and whether that is because of abusing access, abusing insider information, or the kind of corruption that would be illegal if done by any other person in government. New details as well on the losses that Trump's own supporters and investors have been hit with when they lined up to try to join in. And this is a very familiar thing. If you follow Donald Trump's career, you know about the many bankruptcies and the many scams and the many littered projects that failed, leaving other people holding the bag. There are those who call Donald Trump a con man, a confidence man. But as anyone who knows anything about con mans could tell you, you have to find new people. And apparently he did. New people interested in technology or crypto, new younger people who thought maybe this was a way to join Donald Trump, as if he would share in his largesse. But he didn't. Look at this Times reporting that 1 million investors lost not, a couple bucks here or there, but a whopping total of over $3 billion on Trump's crypto coin. You could simplify this as a kind of transfer of wealth from those people who included his investors and people who believed in him, some MAGA fans, a transfer of wealth from them to him and his family. The financial disclosures that we have now reveal Trump got over $2 billion in 1 year alone. Half that, roughly, from the crypto ventures that we know about, over $600 million from the crypto coin. 1 million investors in total lost billions. And the story here tells you a lot about where we are in the kind of unbridled, unapologetic, shameless Trump second term. There are some people who are critical of Trump, and they tell you he's always been the worst thing ever, as if he had nowhere else to go or change. On this show, if you ever watch it, we try to follow the evidence, the facts, the numbers. You can add the adjectives, the opinions yourself. And so I will tell you as a factual matter, the scale, the number of projects and self-enrichment efforts by Donald Trump in the first term were much smaller than this. And so who's paying for it? Well, to some degree, all of us, the American taxpayer, but some people are paying more than others, and they are the Trump believers. One invested $500,000 into that coin I just mentioned and has lost hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's kind of incredible. It's almost a legal scam, they said, in discussing their Trump losses to the New York Times. Now, one of the other problems in our current era is how so many things get put immediately into a kind of partisan polarization machine. So if you talk about something that's just a fact, a sitting president is abusing their power and reach and influence to take money from people who have a lot less. That's just a general fact I just described, mentioned the reporting. Some people would say, oh, is that an anti-Trump thing or an anti-Republican thing? No, it might sound bad for Trump, but it's just an old, classic, almost pathetically familiar example of why you need strict rules governing the people in power, that's government. And generally, if you look over history, there's been a belief that you want to find people who also have good ethics so that they won't constantly be testing what they can get away with. And I can name you people in both parties, John McCain, Barack Obama, who had those kind of ethics, and voters tended to respond positively to that. It goes beyond crypto, which I know can sound like a little bit of a newfangled, kind of confusing virtual place, even though the money some people have lost is real. There's also new revelations about this ring that Belgian diamond sellers gave to Donald Trump as a suspicious, unusual gift after he waived tariffs for Belgian diamond imports. Remember, bribery is an impeachable offense. It's one of the enumerated impeachable offenses in our Constitution. And again, we're talking about real money here, not symbolism. The ring has reportedly over 300 diamonds, over 50 sapphires, over a dozen emeralds, and 6 rubies. You might say it looks a little gaudy or gauche. That's a matter of taste. As a matter of value, it is well above the gift limit that binds all members of Congress, for example. Most public traded company CEOs would be fired on the spot for trying to pocket something like this related to their business. That's payola. What I'm telling you is Donald Trump is falling behind even the lax business standards of American Wall Street. There's also a plaque with a solid gold base from Apple that probably is worth quite a bit less, a Rolex desk clock, I should say, and a gold bar from Swiss business leaders. I'll remind you, there is a senator in prison right now for taking gold bars, Senator Menendez. He happened to be a Democrat. Again, if you care about these issues as an American or as someone who thinks we should have nonpartisan ethical government, you'd be against gold bars when they go to a Democrat or a Republican. Only one of them, though, Donald Trump, is getting away with it right now. And there's the jet. Trump took the gifted plane on his first international voyage to a NATO summit, and he's promised those on board a luxury that nobody's ever seen before. That might be his typical hyperbole, Politico reports. But there's a wood-paneled interior, tan leather seats, carpets, big screen TVs. Trump's White House says this is all fine, no problem. And I can just tell you here in the real world of news and facts and journalism, almost nobody believes that. I showed you Fox News trying to hedge their bets a little, saying, well, this might be too far. I've shown you Megyn Kelly, Joe Rogan, and other conservatives who aren't bound up in the partisan Republican machine, who, whatever you think of them, have talked about this as a grift, as elitism, as unfair. And the bill may be coming due. There's also the focus on Donald Trump's stock trades, where, as I mentioned, the crypto stuff can seem kind of vague. Here you have the very direct question of whether he is timing his personal enrichment towards things that only he can do and he knows about, like his unilateral trade war. And again, if he is doing that in a manner that abuses government power or is a quid pro quo, that could be impeachable. Notice I didn't say jailable. He's got a lot of immunity for anything that goes near his official duties. Tariffs probably do. But it certainly is the kind of thing people have been removed over. People have been removed for less, quite frankly. There's a disclosure form that shows Trump bought hundreds of stocks, including in tech giants, the day before he then pulled back his tariffs, which he and anyone in Wall Street knew would help juice those stocks. On April 8th last year, Trump bought over 300 stocks in the millions of dollars, including companies directly affected by this international trade war: NVIDIA, Amazon, Apple. The next morning, he said, it's a great time to buy, and halted his tariffs.
The stock market went on another wild ride today. Stocks were mostly sideways until midday when President Trump posted on Truth Social that he was authorizing a 90-day pause on reciprocal tariffs, with amazing moves in some tech names. NVIDIA up 18%, Amazon up 12%, Apple rallying as well.
Those rallies were huge, some of the largest jumps in recent history. The overall top 500 stocks went up about 10%. I'll remind you, that's considered a good return for an entire year, let alone a day. And there were larger spikes in the stocks Trump bought, which, as I reminded you, are the kind of international trade-related stocks that would benefit from the tariff pause. Now, let me tell you exactly what the question is. Did Donald Trump abuse inside information to enrich himself? If the answer is yes, again, it's up to Congress to decide whether they view that as an abuse of power, an abuse of office, or whether they view that as one among several abuses of power that enriched himself. Do they view any of this as the quid pro quo of government favors? Were there other people, non-presidents, for example, his family, other staff, lobbyists, lawyers, ex-aides, who were involved in this, who could actually be prosecuted? Again, if there is bribery, those are the questions. Now, some people, they dislike Trump so much, they say, I'm sure he knew. Well, you could be sure, but you would sound pretty presumptuous. Because in law, you'd have to have the elements of the crime, and one of them is the mental state. And I will report for you, the White House says that Trump was not personally involved in the timing of those stock purchases. So if that defense is true, someone else had good timing but didn't benefit from government information, then that would be what we call a defense to that. But the timing is so suspicious, and the other activities that Donald Trump is taking have been so blatantly self-enriching, and his public statements talk about helping people in crypto in order to get benefits from crypto for his family, that any investigator would have to look at all of this in totality. A few months later, Donald Trump discussed corrupt trading in pretty specific detail, so he was thinking about that kind of stuff, and yet projecting or accusing a Democrat, Pelosi, of it.
It happened by, she knows exactly what's going to happen, what's going to be announced. She buys stock, and then the stock goes up after the announcement's made, and she ought to be investigated.
You know what's going to be announced. You buy the stock, it goes up. Was he talking about her? Was he talking about a process that he'd already participated in or encouraged others to do so? Those are questions to be investigated. There is, of course, a reason he was discussing it. There's a provision that apparently Trump didn't like that was trying to address some of this. He attacked a Republican who introduced it. Hawley had to go on Fox and basically assure Donald Trump, by way of his preferred medium, Fox TV, that any Trump trading would be unaffected.
A number of people who are opposed to banning stock trading had said to the president that he would be covered by the bill. He'd have to sell Mar-a-Lago and sell assets. Not the case at all. The president and the vice president, all their assets are totally exempt.
So this is an important way to fight corruption, but the president is exempted. Hawley wanted everyone to know. The bill that ultimately moved forward had that carve out for Trump. I can tell you, we're reminding you all of this because so much goes on that it would be easy to lose track, but this would go into any impeachment investigation about why there was already such an active discussion of exempting them for a law that ultimately did not pass. And why is it bad if everyone else does it, but okay if Trump does it? So Trump's account was buying those stocks timed towards things that he knew he was about to do. And he fought against a potential law that would ban that very type of activity. I want to bring this all into our orbit tonight because while they want you to think nothing matters and they'll get away with it all, there's a heck of a lot of evidence that the winds are changing, that conservatives are mad about this, and that even Trump was worried that the Congress might then, under Republican control, do something that it would certainly want to do without him exerting influence, which is stop this kind of self-dealing while gas prices and everything else is up and people are struggling.
So Donald Trump did nothing this weekend, and I mean nothing. He has a war on in Iran, a war he's supposed to be easily negotiating the end to, a nuclear agreement he's supposed to be easily negotiating with Iran, and he did nothing, didn't spend 1 second on it. Instead, Donald Trump negotiated about soccer. Forget his war, soccer was more important to him. And so the corrupt politician turned soccer referee, Donald Trump, polluted the World Cup competition with one of his ugly Trump pardons. And this time it was for the kind of person who Donald Trump says he hates, despises, and never wants in the United States. As the world knows by now, Donald Trump corrupted the organization that runs the World Cup that has already been stained by corruption in the past. Even I know that. Donald Trump, who knows as much about soccer as I do, which is next to nothing, as you've just seen, decided he didn't like a foul being called on the American team's best player or one of their best players. And so he called the infantile president of the World Cup organization, whose name is actually Gianni Infantino, and who has publicly sucked up to Donald Trump in the most infantile ways, including by giving Donald Trump his very own fake World Cup. And of course, a peace prize. Donald Trump then became the only president in history to accept a fake peace prize. Donald Trump called up Mr. Infantino to ask him to reverse the call of a foul against the star of the USA team, Folarin Balogun.
I didn't think it was a foul.
Really? Well, that's what millions of drunks at bars around America said at the time, too. And that's what millions of sober soccer fans said at the time. Millions of others didn't, but millions did. And just as those people have said it thousands of times before in their lives as fans. And they lived with it because that's what fans do. That's the way sports works. The referees make a call you don't like, but you live with it. Unless you're Donald Trump. And you know that the soccer president guy who pays rent to you for his office in Trump Tower in Manhattan will do whatever you, his landlord, want him to do. And so Mr. Infantino takes that phone call from his landlord, Donald Trump, and the foul goes away. And Folarin Balogun is suddenly allowed to play in the next game, and Donald Trump did all of that, surely without knowing that Folarin Balogun is not just a dual citizen. He is actually a tri-citizen, something I did not know was possible until today. He's a citizen of Nigeria. He's also a citizen of the United Kingdom. And he is a citizen of the United States of America because 25 years ago, his Nigerian mother came to New York City as a visitor while she was pregnant and delivered her baby here. And you have heard Donald Trump scream about that time and time again. And that baby, whose birth in the United States Donald Trump was opposed to, who is now an American citizen by birthright citizenship, is one of the best players or the best player on the USA team. And Donald Trump wants to stop anyone from getting their citizenship that way. Donald Trump asked the United States Supreme Court to reject that citizenship. Donald Trump asked the Supreme Court to prevent anyone else from Nigeria or anywhere else in the world from ever coming to this country while pregnant and delivering a baby here who then achieves American citizenship by birthright citizenship. The USA soccer team, I don't know, might not have won a game. And I don't know. Maybe not win a game in the World Cup without that birthright citizen on their team. Donald Trump's anti-immigration madness landed on David Striever, who publicly shared the opinion that Donald Trump's acting director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement is a monstrous human being. Those are his words, monstrous human being. After the killing of 2 U.S. citizens by Donald Trump's immigration invasion forces in Minneapolis. Both of those killings you can judge for yourself, and maybe you have already, because the evidence exists on video that tells that story. And those videos clearly show enough evidence to prosecute the agents in both of those cases for murder in those killings in Minneapolis. And so calling the acting director of an agency that can reasonably be accused of murder a monstrous human being should not surprise anyone, especially in this country. And so Todd Lyons, who was the acting director at the time, still has to bear the burden of being called a monstrous human being. And worse, by anyone who wants to call him that, because he lives and works in the United States of America, where we all get to do that whenever we want. Many more people have called Donald Trump a monstrous human being, and worse, in writing and into microphones, and will continue to do so. And surely many historians over the next couple of 100 years will be calling Donald Trump a monstrous human being in writing forever. But in Donald Trump's America, if you call the acting director of ICE a monstrous human being, ICE agents show up at your house. Here they are, at David Striever's front door when he wasn't home. They showed up there trying to intimidate him for sending an email, trying to get him to sign a document saying that calling the acting director of ICE in that email a monstrous human being could be a crime, which it could not be and isn't and wasn't. And those ICE agents were there violating the Constitution of the United States. If anything, those ICE agents were on the verge of committing a crime, not David Striever. The Washington Post reports Striever called Lyons a monstrous human being, and America's Reinhard Heydrich, a reference to a high-ranking official in Nazi Germany who oversaw the regime's secret police. He says he never dreamed the note would lead to a knock on his own door. Striever wasn't home, but DHS tracked him to a hotel in New York City where he and his 7-year-old daughter were staying overnight after returning from a trip to Finland. Agents told the hotel front desk they were looking for him, left repeated voicemails, and sought to have him sign an unusual warning notice saying his email could be a crime. Imagine using federal government investigative resources that way, wasting them that way, abusing the Constitution that way. David Striever is now suing the Department of Homeland Security in a lawsuit that says, quote, the First Amendment freedom to speak out in opposition to police action without thereby risking arrest is one of the principal characteristics by which we distinguish a free nation from a police state. The Department of Homeland Security is actively threatening that freedom, tracking down and retaliating against speakers like plaintiff David Striever because he exercised his fundamental right to criticize one of the highest-ranking law enforcement officers in the United States. Our Constitution does not tolerate such a brazen abuse of authority, but a criminally inclined president like Donald Trump, who is seen by most of the world now as a monstrous human being, does indeed tolerate such brazen abuse of authority and encourage it. J.D. Vance compared Donald Trump to Hitler, and now J.D. Vance is his vice president. Why didn't he get a knock on the door? No one knocked on J.D. Vance's front door when he compared Donald Trump to Hitler. Back when James David Vance was opposed to Donald Trump, he called him cultural heroin. It was exactly 10 years ago, on July 4th, 2016, that J.D. Vance published an essay saying, what Trump offers is an easy escape from the pain. To every complex problem, he promises a simple solution. He never offers details for how these plans will work because he can't. Trump's promises are the needle in America's collective vein. The great tragedy is that many of the problems Trump identifies are real, and so many of the hurts he exploits demand serious thought and measured action. Yet so long as people rely on that quick high, so long as wolves point their fingers at everyone but themselves, the nation delays a necessary reckoning. There is no self-reflection in the midst of a false euphoria. Trump is cultural heroin. He makes some people feel better for a bit, but he cannot fix what ails them. And one day, they'll realize it. Donald Trump celebrated the 4th of July with pardons for rich people. The New York Times reports that on Friday, Donald Trump issued pardons to 11 men, most of whom had been convicted of crimes related to the Clean Air Act, a bedrock environmental law. The president also pardoned Adam Kidden, a major donor to Republicans, including Mr. Trump. He had served about 2.5 years in prison for his role in a fraud scheme involving the disgraced former lobbyist Jack Abramoff. One of the big differences between the Democratic Party and Republican Party is on display in Maine tonight, where Democratic Senate nominee Graham Plattner is at the evaluating the path forward stage of his campaign. That's what he said tonight in a video statement after new allegations emerged today of sexual misconduct and aggression with a former girlfriend in Maine. This comes after many other scandalous revelations about the candidate. When the then Democratic frontrunner for governor in California, Eric Swalwell, issued a similar style video statement saying he was going to spend some time with his family evaluating his candidacy, 48 hours later, he announced he was dropping out of the race. That's the normal schedule in these matters. No one can remember the last time a candidate announced he was evaluating the path forward, who then found a path forward for his candidacy. Graham Plattner would probably not be facing any problems at all in his party if he were a Republican nominee. Texas Attorney General, candidate for Senate in Texas, was impeached by his own party in the Texas House of Representatives. And he has Donald Trump's full endorsement. Democrats in Maine still have time to replace Graham Plattner on the ballot. And now Democratic members of the United States Senate are abandoning his candidacy.